Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you join us from around the world. Welcome back to Creation Conversations, where tonight we are actually doing the advertised topic for once, which is a Q&A special. And we had a little bit of a chat as well amongst us, so we're going to be shaking a few things up with Creation Conversations going forward. So watch this space, and we'll get a whole load of new topics prepared for you for our next little season. But for now, it's time to deal with your questions. Some of the questions from the past streams, a lot of the questions that you've given to us this evening. And it's a chance for us also to give you a little bit of an update as to some of the things that have been going on in creation research over the last week or so. So we've got a few reports from our team, which we'll go around and have a look at. But John, why don't we start with you? Because I hear that you've been given some presents.
We certainly have. Young Craig, you can see on the screen at the moment, he was up preaching in Toowoomba at a church, and so my wife and I went up to check him out and make sure he wasn't a heretic. We didn't think he was, but it was a great morning. But we had lunch after that with an older couple who said they were so excited by our museum. Would we like all the artifacts that their relatives had collected from Africa and the Pacific Islands and things like that? You see, this was a family, a Christian family, that had been involved in mission for a long time. So I was really thrilled to say yes, because anything that's free is usually a great benefit to creation research. So look at the gift button later on. But this lot included rhinoceros horns. Yes, great-great-granddaddy of this old elderly lady's wife. She was in her 80s, so great-great-granddaddy goes back a long way. And he brought these into Australia. Of course, we did have to verify where they were from and how long they'd been here, because there are rules. Perhaps Joe might want to talk about those rules on bringing things out of places like Africa, bringing animals that are sort of on the edge of danger, extinction-wise. So rhinoceros is included in that. And so we had to verify that they'd been in Australia for more than 100 years, and they will look great in our new museum display. African stuff. We also have a great lot of now Pacific Island stuff. When you look at these ceremonial type spears, we are doing an open day at the end of August. That's August the 31st, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, both days that weekend, at our new museum, Creation Discovery Centre, which is really 1 year old now. So we'll be including Pacific Island spears. And look at the design. When you get up close, you can tell this didn't happen by itself. Of course, I wouldn't like this one poked into me at all. We're having spears and weapons, and we're having a great time on the Australian Aboriginals. And again, to remind you of why this matters, my wife and I went to meet some of our family on the beach yesterday for lunch. Great time, beautiful sunny weather. Sorry about your weather, Diane, down there in Canberra. It was just delightful here in Queensland. Even though it's the middle of winter, it was a balmy, warm day, no breeze, no snow, no ice, none of that sort of thing. But the reality is we also met a family who's just gone into homeschooling. And you say, why did they go into homeschooling? Well, the mum told us she was just getting sick and tired of her kindergarten children being forced every morning to repeat a formula of apology to the Aboriginals in Australia for robbing their land off them. And I said, in kindergarten, are you sure you got that right? And she said, yes, it's starting in kindergarten, and they're teaching them lies about 65,000 years of inhabitation here, the world's oldest culture, in all the way through elementary school, or primary school as we call it over here. So pray as we open this new racial Aboriginal display, origin of races, artifacts from all around the globe. Just pray on the 31st of August and on the 1st of September. And if you live in the southeast Queensland, please come. Let us know you're coming, because we only have one room that is for a crowd. That's where we do our little lectures, which only holds a maximum of 50 people. So you do have to book. It's free, but go to Creation Research and text us or phone us if you're coming on August the 31st and on September the 1st. So that's the end of this month. We'll look forward to hearing from you, and you too can come and see some of our wonderful donations that have just arrived from Africa all legitimate, all certified as to how long they've been here as well. Okay, back to you, Joe.
All right, thank you very much for that, John. And yes, we do, or are rather, very grateful for all and any donations, things like this. We obviously have a lot of research programs which we go out and collect things and dig things, but some of our best quality displays and best research has been off the back of people who have donated things like, well, maybe not trying to smuggle rhino horns and the like out of countries, but yeah, you do need to make sure that, as John said, this was something that I had to study for part of when I was working as a zookeeper and some of transferring live animals. Because believe it or not, if you try and transfer a rhino from one zoo from England, say, to a zoo in France, you don't just have to fill out all of the CITES declaration, which is for transporting animals, right? Especially endangered animals. You have a separate form for the ivory that comes with it. So even though it's still attached to the animal, which is quite fun. But anyway, yeah, we do really appreciate donations like this, which helps grow the museum as well as helps us do the research in the work that we're doing and the ministry that we're doing as well. So yes, find your local office if you have things to display, and you'll be able to get in touch with us that way. Let's carry on round with some reports, and let's go on to Glenn. What have you been up to?
Well, I've mostly been getting ready for a trip that's coming up. We're going out west, going to do some fossil digs. It started out with just going out there to do fossil digs. We're going to go to the Green River Formation, which is famous for the highest concentration of fossilized fish. And we sell these in creation research, but we're starting to run out. So we're going to go to try to dig up some more. But we're also going to dig in a formation. This one comes from the formation they call the sandwich. It's a layer that's got the high concentration of fish, but there's another layer that has anywhere from bats, crocodiles, you name it, and they're much larger. And we're going to try that as well. The other thing we've been up to, is I've mentioned before, is that we've got a stream that's highly mineralized that we can fossilize items, such as this cute little teddy bear that sat in the stream for about 3 months, and he's now turned to stone. The other thing I've been up to is one that's kind of dirty and nasty. I really don't want to deal with. But when Joe was here, Joe mentioned that he has an armadillo fossil, and he asked if we could get the head of an armadillo. Now, he was thinking, I think, my brother-in-law in Louisiana, but recently armadillos, which are an invasive animal, have moved into our area. So a friend of ours in the ministry called and said that there's a dead armadillo on the road. And I thought, oh, well, I'll go get the head. I didn't realize turning that head into this would be such a nasty job, and you don't want the details on what all's involved. I'll just say that it stunk. It was just nasty beyond imagination. And then it fell to pieces, and I thought, I'm in trouble now after all that work. But I was able to put it back together, and it's going to make a nice display in Joe's museum, and you can see that the jawbone is separate. It didn't have a hinge, but it's connected by muscle. So that's what I've been up to, and I'm now ready to send that off to Joe with the teddy bear, and I've got teddy bears for John and for Craig as well, and that's kind of what we've been up to.
That's great stuff. Thanks for that, Glenn. And yes, just to give you a bit of perspective to the armadillos, right? We've got a cast of the giant armadillo, extinct armadillo, and also a cast of the giant glyptodon, which is basically a giant armadillo, sort of the size of a small car type of size armadillo.
Wow.
And a little while ago from Vance Nelson, who's one of our associates up in Canada, we got off of him for our UK museum some of the actual scales of the armadillo. So the great big glyptodon scales, which are like that kind of big, the scoots, down to the ones that are that kind of size for the giant armadillo, down to the modern day ones, which are teeny tiny. And so we've got the scales, we've got 2 of the 3 of the skulls. We needed that last skull in the picture. So thank you very much for that, Glenn. We much appreciate you doing all the dirty work for us. That's great. Craig, over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. As you can see, I'm in a very pink room in Canberra, and it's good to be back down here, just staying with the family I lived with while I was at university. But I'm feeling the Canberra temperature. It's about -4 degrees today, which is about 20 odd degrees Fahrenheit for you Americans. But we've had a very busy week. We've spoken at a couple of churches in the Newcastle area, and a school in the Lake Macquarie area with about 60 students and maybe a dozen adults as well, because it was combined with homeschoolers, and that went really well. We have also done a bunch of fossil collecting throughout the region of Newcastle before travelling down here to Canberra, and so I've got some slides, if you can just put us across to that, please, Joe.
Yeah, just pulling that up for you now.
Yeah, so we went to a number of places. Just tell me when it's up, because I've...
Yeah, we're up. We're good.
Okay, so yeah, this is Derek and I. Derek is sitting next to me actually right here. We can introduce him to everybody in a minute. But we went to this cliff face there. You can see the sharp boundaries between the layers. No evidences there of weathering or soil formations, or as Glenn would tell us, there's no bioturbation there. But we did find a bunch of dicridium fossils, fern fossils there. But unfortunately, we had them sitting on a rock. You can just see just behind us there, we had them sitting up on one of those rocks. But then a big wave came in, saturated Derek in particular, and took all our fossils. So thankfully, it didn't wash Derek away. But anyway, it was a bit exciting. Earlier in the week, we went to Caves Beach, and we were looking for polystrate tree fossils, and there's a good one that we found up in the cliff. Climbed up to it and got a bit of a shot there, just with a bit of scale. And there's a number of them there. The one on the left is probably the best one we came across in the time we had available. And there's another one there you can see that's traversing across various strata. But on the way out, we actually stumbled across quite a big rock. You don't quite get the scale there. That's actually quite heavy. And to carry it 300 metres or so out to the car wasn't easy, but we thought that might be a good museum specimen just to show some polystrate trees. And you can see the strata there on the right-hand side and the trees going through it. There possibly is 3 trees there. We'll have a closer look at that when we get a chance. Yeah, so you can see the coal above my hat there, but also the petrified piece of timber beneath it. So there's lots of interesting things to have a look at, looking at coastal cliffs, as long as the cliff doesn't fall down on top of you. And here's some Glossopteris leaves. We haven't got these in Tasmania to my knowledge, or there might be some in places, but we haven't been to those places yet. But there was absolutely millions of these just in the rocks that we were looking at. And this was a particularly good specimen we were able to get. And then we also travelled up the Hunter Valley and came across the Rixus Creek coal mine and took a photo of it. The chap that we were with used to work there, and just highlight the machines down in the centre left of the picture. These are massive machines. The dump trucks there are over 5 metres high. That's about 15 feet. And that just gives you a perspective of all the dark coal layers and how high they are. and there's a massive coal in there. This is all buried plant material in between strata, which is mudstone, and you can just imagine the event of Noah's flood burying all that, and John might comment on it and how it reflects the strata machine experiments that we do. So yeah, that's just a couple of the things we've been doing. So come back to us. Thanks, Joe, and maybe some of the other guys would like to comment on that.
Well, I'll throw my hat into the basket there, Craig, since you dubbed me in anyway. Having been to most of these sites, you will notice that the reason why Professor Edgeworth David, the most famous first geologist of the area and first professor of the university geology, he reached the conclusion these were all flood deposits, right? Because you find those fossil trees which you dug up and took one home, which you found sitting on the beach. You will find that they are pine trees by and large, and the outside is turned to coal, not the inside. And there's no pine debris around the base. There's all of those fascinating Glossopteris leaves, and there's millions of those through the area, beautifully preserved, a fern-like sort of leaf. And as you go from there up through the Newcastle Basin, head towards Singleton, where you saw the layers like in our strata machine, and those layers only get formed because water is traveling sideways. These are not swamps slowly buried one on top of the other, but massive amounts of debris, pine trees, etc., that have been washed in and are standing upright because they were buried before they fell over. So great work, Craig. Great additions to the museum in Tasmania. So once you've visited our museum on the 31st of August and the 1st of September, folks out there, make sure you travel down to Tasmania and see the next displays they'll put up down there. Good work, Craig and Derek.
Thank you.
All right, great stuff. Well, the only person that we haven't heard from then is Diane. And I've actually got a question for you, Diane, even though you don't have a ministry report per se. I do have a question, and we actually had a question in the chat earlier, which is semi-related to what this question pertains to, which is what we thought of the Olympics opening ceremony. But I actually, before we get into, we might want to comment on the opening ceremony in a bit. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you, because the recent controversy, Diane, has been over, and there's been a lot of misinformation about it as well. So we thought we could clear a few things up. There was what the newspapers were calling a biological male who was fighting in the women's category, and there was a big sort of controversy after he effectively, well, the opponent basically gave up after just a few seconds, less than a minute, fighting. Now, it turns out there's been lots of stuff bandied around on social media, everything from this person was a trans person, a transgender person, all the way to this biological male side of things. And it turns out if you dig a little bit deeper, this is somebody who was raised as a female. This is somebody who has female anatomy, shall we say, on the outside, but has an XY chromosome. It's something that has now been called intersex, which is a genuine medical condition. But we've got here then a person who's been raised as a female, somebody who has female features and female anatomy, but has XY chromosomes. From a purely scientific perspective, and before we get into some of the, or if we even get into any of the politics and comments and the biblical point of view, but just Diane, just can you comment on this issue regarding, or from rather, a biological point of view? Is this person a male? Is it a female? What are we dealing with when it comes to XY chromosomes?
Well, if you have a Y chromosome, you're male. That's the determining factor. There are a couple of extremely rare genetic conditions where people are conceived as male, and they are male, but because of mutations or a particular mutation, their male reproductive organs don't develop because they are insensitive to the male hormones. But you do produce testosterone in other parts of the body. In fact, females even produce testosterone from other glands in their body. So these people are not transgender in that they have not done anything to alter their gender. It's just that at birth, because they didn't have any male external reproductive organs, they were recognized as females and brought up as females. But if you do a chromosome test, they do have a Y chromosome, so they are male. Now, this is a very rare condition. There are a couple of variations on it. And it's to do with a lack of ability to respond to the male hormones in order to develop male reproductive organs. Usually these people are not the ones who are involved in the various political protests that are going on at the moment. But it is an issue with men's and women's sport. But it has been known about for a while, but it's only just become a big issue now that transgender and all of these other gender debates have been going on in the last few years.
It's also interesting, Diane, that the Olympic Committee's excuse was they were female on their passport. They didn't check anything at all like that, even though the bloke looked like a man, had muscles like a man, hit a girl with a power that no woman would ever deliver. Because as one chief boxer here in Australia said last night, it's a fact that any male will on average be 20% stronger than any woman, and you can't deny it.
And one other thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is that this person was banned, or rather was disqualified from an international competition last year for failing to comply with the gender test. In other words, she was disqualified, or he was disqualified, because it wasn't able to determine whether they were male or female. So there is a lot of controversy around it. I think we do have something that is a little bit more unusual, a little bit more unique, in the sense that we are dealing with this extremely rare condition, I suppose you could call it, of intersex, as opposed to somebody who has consciously chosen to undergo a gender change, a sex change. We're not dealing with a transgender person in the way that we would understand it today, in the sense of undergoing transition or anything like that, but we are still having to challenge with this detail of, okay, what is biologically and biblically the definition of male and female? So we have our biological definition then, XY, right? If somebody has a Y chromosome, they're male. What's a biblical take on this then? Perhaps John, if you wanted to comment.
Well, yes, I did, as I think I've said sometimes, a deliberate course in genetics to discover something about my own family, because we have pyloric stenosis in our family. I was born with it, and the doctor said I'd never grow up to be a big man. I'd hate to see what I was like if I was born normal. But in reality, it really has affected my family, quite a few deaths down through the years due to pyloric stenosis. For those of you who don't understand the words, you are born with a part of your stomach that won't open, and so you end up vomiting all of mum's milk back out very explosively, usably. And I was a test baby because they tried a new drug on me, which apparently worked, praise the Lord. After about 18 months, I could swallow normally. But when I checked out with the original doctors, why didn't they use this drug anymore? They said I proved it was too dangerous. So I'm an experimental result, but benefited from it and grew into quite a strapping young lad. At 14, I was 6'3.5". So when you have a look at that, the thing that got me interested in doing genetics was I wanted to discover what percentage of my children or what chance they really stood of it, because it tends to be sex related. Mainly the boys are born with pyloric stenosis, and it affects them. So I had to investigate XX, XY, XXY, Y only, XXX, and you'll find that every time you get away from the standard XX or XY, it steps down a ring. These are not alternative sexes, they are degenerate effects. They always have a negative effect, including the XXY. And I think, Glenn, you'll be interested in knowing, because the USA wouldn't allow gender to be listed on the birth certificate, correct?
Yes, more and more doctors are going to not listing the sex on your birth certificate.
Yeah.
Something
Of
that's
course,
being promoted.
with this guy who's been brought up as a girl, the Olympic Committee again failed because, strip your pants off, tell us what your genes are, show us. And as you said, Joseph, he's failed a test like that just a year ago. So I think it's the Olympic Committee's fault. And I pity that poor female boxer who quit in the first 40 seconds and say, I've never been hit so hard. This is unfair. And it really is unfair. So, yeah, that's the only comment I've got.
No, that's good. I just thought it's nice sometimes. I mean, on a regular show like Creation Conversations, obviously we deal with a wide range of topics, but it's nice to be able to sometimes touch on some of the more newsy side of things that have been happening recently. And obviously it's not just this is something that's come out in the last day, I think, or day and a half, whereas the opening ceremony of the Olympics was a little bit of a while ago. And in case nobody's been on social media, the big controversy around that has been the apparent mocking of the Lord's Supper in the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And what's been really interesting for me, I don't know if anybody else has got any comments, but what's been interesting for me is just to see how many people have attempted to try and excuse the I was about to say the French. I mean, the opening, the organisers behind the opening committee, but also just seeing how fast and how quickly the organisers have backpedaled, because there's no doubt about it. There's an awful lot of paganism mixed up in it. I mean, this is the Olympics after all, right? The pagan Greek festival, effectively. So there was certainly a lot of pagan god elements in it. There's no doubt about it. But what's interesting, if you look at some of the original information that came out about it, one of the original organizers mentioned it being a parody of the Lord's Supper. You have the original title, which was a new take on the Lord's Supper. All of this kind of stuff has been deleted, including one of the lead actors, I suppose we could call them, who portrayed the Christ-like figure in the portrayal of the Lord's Supper. She actually posted on her Instagram, I believe it was, or some social media, effectively, rewriting the New Testament, which was later deleted. So there's it certainly seems that even if it wasn't a full-blown parody of the Last Supper, it was certainly it certainly had intention behind it, put it that way. And so it's interesting just to see how much backlash they've had, and that therefore how quickly they've had to backpedal from it was nothing to do with that, it was just to do with pagan festivals and nothing else. It does make you wonder, though, that if they'd have made a mockery of Muhammad or Islam, just how on fire would Paris be right now? Quite a lot, I suspect. So anyway, any comments?
You brought up a point here that relates to both of those Olympic items about the female boxer or this. Our standard, and we make no apologies for this, is what does the Bible say about the Lord's Supper? What does the Bible say about the creation of sex? And that's the standard, and we won't backpedal from that. If you want a standard to judge sex by, you have to start in the beginning. God made them male and he made them female, and then the history of the world, will keep saying it, I know some Christians don't like it, is from good to bad to worse. Whether it's sex or morality, you leave God out of your knowledge, and the Bible is emphatic. God hands you over to foolishness, and as much as you'll be criticized, you may try to backpedal, but you won't hide from the God who knew the intentions of your heart, whether it was boxing or whether it's parodying his death, his Last Supper, his celebration of life and death for us as a payment for sin. So that's our standard, and we don't backpedal from it.
John,
let's face
speaking
it,
of
boxing's a
good-
dumb sport anyway.
What's that, Craig?
I just said, let's face it, boxing's a dumb sport anyway.
So I was going to say, you mentioned from good to bad to worse. I thought it was good. It started out with them riding in the boats, but when they got to Lady Gaga, I knew it was going to worse, and I turned it off.
Your country can take full responsibility for Lady Gaga.
Yes, what I don't know what she was doing in a French. I don't know. Don't go there.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so let's do a couple of quick thank yous, and then let's dive into some questions that have come in to the chat this evening. So we've got a thank you to Fiorella, and we've got a thank you. I'm sure we had some others down here. Yes, a thank you to Neil as well for £10. Thank you very much. It's good to see you as well, and good to see everybody getting involved. Let's have a quick look at this question here, Glenn, if you would like to answer it, because I know that you also sport a Creation Kingdom Zoo t-shirt. So
yes, and a Creation Kingdom hat.
And a hat, yes, I got that somewhere too.
Creation Kingdom is a zoo. It's up on the Tennessee, Virginia line, West Virginia. I remember Joe and I went there 4 years ago and met with the owner, the developer of it, and looking at what possible collaborations maybe that we could have with them. And it was just a very interesting zoo, and I know Joe enjoyed it very much. It really didn't have a lot promoting creation other than the name. But even with that, the owner said he was catching a lot of harassment from outside just by trying to promote creation in the name.
Yeah. They had a few little displays. It was a very nice little zoo as well. So, and we got a little gift package at the end of it, which was nice, which included the t-shirt and the hat and everything else. Anyway, let's have a bit more of a detailed question. Diane, here's a question for you. Biological question. This comes in from Douglas Boffey. So let me put this up. Given that we have 4 types of photoreceptors, 3 chromatic and 1 achromatic, why do we see only a 3-dimensional color space?
Well, we have 4 types of photoreceptors. 3 of them actually determine what colors you see, because they're tuned, as it were, to the different frequencies of light. So long, middle, and high, which roughly corresponds to sort of red, green, and blue in terms of what we perceive. And your brain has to put that information together and come up with a color. The other one determines or is sensitive to how the overall amount of light. So it doesn't distinguish between particular colors. And so that goes into the mix as well. And your brain interprets that as how dark or light particular colors are and how dark or light the ambient light around you is. So we need all of those together in order to perceive the colors that we see. We need to know how much overall light there is and then what the different wavelengths are. And then your brain puts that all together. So it's an example of a brilliant system which couldn't have evolved one step at a time, because you need all of those color receptors to work together. People who are colorblind are actually just lacking in one of those, and so they see distorted colors. And then you have to have all of the brain circuits in order to put that information together, just like you would with a digital camera, in order to come up with the image that you see on the computer. Now, no one says that the digital camera and the computer that creates the image came about by chance random processes. It couldn't. But you've got an even better system in your brain, which is more accurate, that supposedly came about by chance random processes. So that doesn't make any sense to me. This is a wonderful example of design. So that's why we need all four of those things, because we need to know how much overall light there is, as well as the individual frequencies which correspond to the individual colours.
Diane, I don't know whether you want to comment on this, but I had a friend whose brother was red-green colorblind. And
Yes.
the reason they found that out was he would eat the green tomatoes off the tomato bushes and always complain of stomach aches. And the same with green apples, and he couldn't tell the difference, so he had to learn another way of identifying them. But just recently,
Yes.
I've come across this in animals, because we have a big German Shepherd cross. He's a lovely dog, or she's a lovely dog, good watchdog, keeps out Jehovah's Witnesses and tax collectors. So really, really good to play with, though, because we have a friend who works here several days a week to help the ministry out, but she loves the dog, and she bought a red toy for it. You know, one of these squeezy toys that squeaks, and
Yes.
the dog, in the backyard where we've got concrete paths and low grass, the dog would chase it wherever you threw it. Now, one day I took the red toy down the back and I threw it into the grass would have been about 6 inches, 10 centimeters or so and above tall, and the dog could not find it. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I took it back to the other place, threw it, and the dog found it where there was no competition. And then I took it back to a different spot where there was weeds, and I threw it again, and the dog couldn't find it. And I thought, wonder if the dog's red-green colorblind. So I did a bit of checking on the vet sites, and it turns out that all dogs are red-green colorblind, regardless of what else you think about the color. They cannot find red objects in a green background easily, except by smell. And that's how my dog would take over. He'd go sniffing all around the place and finally find his slobber all over the grass and trace it from there. You got any comments on that, Diane?
Yes, dogs are lacking in the chromatic, the receptors for the different different light frequencies. Yes, quite a lot of mammals are actually.
It's quite common with people.
Yeah.
I was working with a fellow scientist in the Nevada test site. We were working on recharge in the nuclear bomb craters, and we were driving out to our site and I was talking about, well, we've had a runoff event since the last time we were out here. He was like, how do you know that? And I was like, how do you not know that? All the bushes have greened up. Well, he couldn't see that. They looked just the same to him. That's when I found that he was green colorblind.
Yeah.
Wow, good stuff. All right, let's have another question then. Pull up another question on what to think about the biting insects. How would they fit into a good world, and when did they start biting?
Well, we've done programs on this on, why do snakes bite? Did they bite in the Garden of Eden? What about venom? So, Joe, if you can post up a link to those where people can go and watch the whole program. But growing up in Australia, or Glenn in southern USA, we are experts in knowing which insects are liable to bite you. But in reality, as Diane's well researched it, tell us what you found out about what they're actually biting for, Diane.
Well, with mosquitoes, it's only the female mosquitoes that actually bite you, and what they're looking for is iron and extra protein in order to lay their eggs. So they don't even bite you throughout their whole life cycle. It's just when they need to lay eggs, they need these extra nutrients, and so they will go looking for them from whatever sources are available, and human skin happens to be an easily accessible one, because our skin is relatively hairless, and we have blood vessels quite close to the surface. But in between that, female mosquitoes and male mosquitoes for all of their life, or for all of their adult life, just live on plant juices. So the proboscis, which they use to actually suck blood, is just as good for sucking plant juices, and that's what they live on, and plant nectar. They're Some mosquitoes just live on flower nectar. So the fact that they are designed to suck blood, or they can suck blood, doesn't mean they're originally designed to suck blood. It just means that they are equipped for sucking fluids. And when the female mosquitoes need to find extra nutrients, particularly iron, in order to lay their eggs, they will go looking for it wherever it's found. So this is a case of the world going from good to bad to worse, because the plants no longer can provide the amount of iron and protein that they need. So we have some questions about insects on our Ask site. So that's askjohnmackay.com. There's also one about insect stings, which is a related issue as well. If you might like to look up that, perhaps we can put up the link for that to the Ask site.
Yeah, I've put up some links in the
Thank you.
chat. Just to maybe just ask you to comment on one last thing, because I've also shown up a link to be able to go and see the Good God Bad Bugs program as well. And Fiorella has actually come in to say that in her case it wasn't a mosquito, but probably a very tiny insect rather than non-visible. So we won't go down into trying to work out exactly what insect attacked Fiorella, but this is actually an objection that the likes of David Attenborough has brought up with regards to this bug, which can only survive in the eye of a child. So maybe just a brief comment, Diane or John, about this sort of little bitey insects like that.
All right, let me make a comment first, Diane, that I've shared with you, and we took it as a basis of our project. I first came across this because I grow and breed orchids. Now, I was absolutely amazed one day to find a mosquito landing on one of my orchids, and then to watch it as the tongue of the orchid, which is quite amazingly mechanized, it flung the mosquito into the back of the flower, and then it stayed closed. So the mosquito, when you actually cut the flower open later on to check, the mosquito was down in the base, absolutely unharmed, enjoying a good drink of nectar, and then it would make its way out past the pollen repository, and it would collect pollen from this flower, and the only way it could get out was via the back door. And then the front door stayed open until the mosquito had flown far enough away to deposit the pollen of this orchid in another orchid. And you think, man, that is a design feature, but it only works on tiny insects like mosquitoes. Now, yes, we do have giant fossil mosquitoes in the fossil record, but I guess there were giant orchids too. I'm not quite sure about the orchids bit, but we certainly have a look at insects whose proboscis is designed for sucking juices. In the case of all the mosquitoes, they will suck fern trees, fern sap, they will suck all of those things, including nectar. So they have a bad report because the females will bite you, but they're looking for the materials, the iron sources for their egg layers. You'll probably find the little bug may have been a sand fly or something like that, very tiny. They cause havoc here in Australia out in the sandy areas. Diane, you got any more comments to make on those ones?
Yes, there are other insects that do just literally bite you because they just eat the skin. Going back to the issue of David Attenborough, that's another little bitey fly. They're little black flies that live by the rivers in Africa. And so the disease that David Attenborough is referring to is called river blindness. Now, what happens is that these flies actually carry microscopic worms. And so if they bite you, these microscopic worms just get transferred into the wound and then get into the blood system. And eventually, some of these microscopic worms can get trapped in the eye because of the way the blood circulation works in the eye. And if they do, they die. And so you've got these dead microscopic worms there. And so your normal immune system will react to that and you'll get inflammation. And it's the inflammation that causes the river blindness. So it's not that the worms can live in the eyeballs. In fact, they die in the eyeballs, and the inflammation that results in makes people go blind. So this is a terrible disease. There's no doubt about that. But David Attenborough is wrong on the science of this, let alone the theology that he uses to say, well, God wouldn't, that's such a nasty thing. God, a good God wouldn't do that. But even the science is wrong. River blindness is a reaction to being infected by these worms. And yes, you are infected by these worms because of these little bitey flies. Now, in the very good world, the flies would not have bitten people because there would have been other sources of nutrients for them. So this is a very good example of how the world started out good, but has degenerated because the whole environment has degenerated. And sadly, we are living in the degenerate part of the world, and we've had thousands of years for it to degenerate. So a lot of insect-borne diseases are the result of the world going bad, insects having to look for other sources of nutrients, and human beings with our relatively hairless skin are a good source of protein and nutrients, and the insects just happen to have the right equipment for either biting us or sucking from us, or sucking blood from us. So it's a classic case of the result of the fallen world rather than God's design. If anyone else would like to add to that, if you have some particular examples. I certainly sympathise with you about sandflies, if that's what bit you, because sandflies happen to like me as well, so I have to be very careful when I visit the coast to in the mornings and evenings to protect my skin from sandflies.
I will say that I like taking my wife with me when I go to the coast or to the beach because she's like, a bait. They don't get me. They go after her. Amazing.
Yes.
Joe, you're silent.
There we go. That makes it a little bit better. There we are. All right, let's carry on with with another question. Actually, it's a fun question from Douglas, but it actually makes an important point. Human fingerprints are indistinguishable from koala fingerprints, but primate fingerprints are quite different. Does that mean that we evolved from koalas? And I remember actually doing this. I remember first learning about it. I think it was a Steve Backshall program. He was a sort of a naturalist type guy here in the UK. And I remember he was doing a quiz once, and it was one of the questions he got wrong. What animal has the closest fingerprints to humans? And he went chimpanzee, and it wasn't. It was a koala. I wouldn't quite say they're indistinguishable, but they are certainly the closest looking things when you compare human fingerprints to, say, things like monkeys or chimps or orangutans or the like. Now, this is something which is often used, evolutionary speaking. Similarity means relationship in some way. If you've got similar looking things or similar features, there's often an assumption that they're in some way related. And then you get this term like convergent evolution that gets bandied around, where you have things that are apparently completely unrelated, and yet they have very much, big similarity. So can we use similarities as a way of assigning relationships, or are we looking at evidence of a common design? And that would be the further point, excuse me, to go into it. Any comments?
I think it's just a straight out fallacy. It's true that related creatures are similar, but going the other way, there are so many fallacies like this one here that you end up saying it's not a rule in reverse. Similarities do not mean relationship, even though relationship means similarities. So you'll find that the unrelated creatures have enough differences. So the biologist says, hey, that's a koala. Hey, this is a female human being. And so there's so many other differences. Like I have koalas living in the trees on my property. Now, I always tell people that when they're around in the mating season, don't worry if they hear a woman being murdered in the middle of the night. It's just the koalas. Their mating sounds are unbelievable, raucous. So I'm glad that human beings don't mate that way. So there's an awful lot of differences that tell you, hey, that grey furry object up a tree is not a human being, it's a koala. So that's the convenient rule where there's enough similarities, there's enough differences to enable you to classify them as koala, primate, or whatever. And we've spent enough time on programs of the differences between apes and humans. In fact, a slip in a commercial on August the 31st, you've heard me mention that date before, and September the 1st, one of the new displays at our Creation Discovery Centre will be a Lucy skeleton and a instruction on how to tell the difference between Lucy and her chimpanzee relatives, because that's really what she was, a slightly bigger chimpanzee than the present, and the human beings. The similarities are almost non-existent, apart from the fact that chimpanzees breathe air, we breathe air, so therefore you have some sort of hemoglobin base for absorbing oxygen, but nobody confuses a chimpanzee with a human being. Even the little kids know which one is the monkey.
The similarity of koala fingerprints might be the solution to a lot of unsolved crimes here in Australia. we might need to go out to the forest to investigate a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it.
I'm serious.
Serious, yeah.
Well, they pretty much don't use fingerprints anymore for solving crimes. They mostly use this and all the cameras that are out there taking pictures of you everywhere you travel.
Yeah.
It's amazing that Bigfoot hasn't been discovered yet, isn't it? It's anyway. Here's another question. This is similar to kind of question to the things that we were discussing a couple of weeks ago, or 3 or 4 weeks ago, on Creation Conversations with relation to when snakes had legs. There was a program that was, I think, 3 or 4 weeks back. But John, perhaps if you'd like to tackle this one. This is a question that came in tonight live. Was the serpent of Genesis 3 the first of its kind? If so, did God specially create a mate for it to procreate into the numerous snake varieties exhibited in the fossil record?
Okay, you will find that in the beginning, God made them male and female. No serpent is restricted from that. And even though Satan is using the serpent, which seems to involve some sort of volition, because the serpent is judged for what he's done or allowed to be done in tempting the woman first, and she fails the test and gives it to her husband, who willingly fails the test. Again, I can stress that the Bible blames the man for sin, not for the woman. She is tricked and the man willfully sins. Now, from then on, you find God curses the serpent. Now, when we look at the origin of snakes, it's certainly true that even the evolutionist is claiming things like big goannas have degenerated into serpents or snakes. The serpent, of course, is more like the dragon, more like the dinosaur, as we've suggested before. Maybe it really was a beautiful looking dinosaur that was tempting Eve. And the degeneration is, it already has a mate, and the curse is upon the serpent. And it's one of those things where if a defect gets into a family coming through the male side, it will very soon, if there's only two of the kind of that, then it will very soon predominate. And you'll find that and later on, other creatures will be affected by the fallen world, and the same sorts of losses will occur in them. E.g., we have humans with short legs. E.g., we have humans with no legs, and they're not related to the serpent at all. So these are increasingly degenerate versions of each creature that have happened since the fall, but the serpent gave rise to the serpent family whose legs are diminished right from the beginning.
All right, great stuff. Let's carry on with some more questions here. Oh, we've got some more. Here we are. All right, we've come back with a donation, so thank you very much for that, and a bit of a further comment to the question as well. Oh no, we've just dealt with that. Sorry. Hopefully that's made sense for you, but thank you very much for the donation as well. If the serpent was the first of its kind, did it have a mate to multiply into all the varieties in the fossil record? If not, how is it cursed above every beast of the field? Any comment on the cursed above the beast of the field, John?
Yes, because it's the first creature that's cursed. So it's cursed above, cursed in priority, cursed first. And it's the one that God picks out, and he deliberately curses it. So all the others will be affected by the fall of man and by the decreasing lifespan, by the effect of the flood and the changing climate. But the one that was cursed first is the serpent. So there's the context. It's cursed above all the others.
Great stuff. All right, let's carry on with some more questions. And if anybody has any comments or things that they'd like to jump in with, then please do so. We've got, whoops, there we are. Is Noah's flood, this is a question from Douglas Boffey, is part of Noah's flood buried deep within the mantle? Of course, big question is, what is deep within the mantle? Because we've never been there. I think I'm right in saying, John, that we've never actually been through the crust.
That's correct,
isn't it? Yeah. So from my knowledge, all interpretations of what's inside the Earth is purely based off of readings that you take during volcanoes and earthquakes and the like, based on what kind of light waves and sound waves bounce up through the middle of the Earth. So there is still an element of speculation even within there. Is part of Noah's flood buried deep within the mantle? I'll make a couple of comments and then perhaps throw it over to the rest of the team. One of the interesting things that you can actually do with geology is go to places where there are great big rips through the Earth's crust. Grand Canyon is obviously one of them. There's a huge one by the Blue Mountains in Australia and so on and so forth. And what's fascinating is that as you go down through the so-called geological column, down through the fossil record, what you find is that it's very easy, as we've mentioned many times, to work out where sequences start. It's very, very difficult to work out where sequences stop. Now, you can actually trace these sequences all the way down through the so-called geological column, and you'll find that at the bottommost base layer, you find that there are very little evidence to no evidence of any such living creatures. There's been a few marks that have been interpreted as being living creatures, but they could just as easily be, chemicals that have been mixed up. And you find that at the base of all of these layers, with all of the fossils in them, at the base you have a huge deposit. I've traveled up to Scotland. You can see it up there. It's clearly been laid down in a flood-like environment because it's full of cross-bedding, it's full of giant boulders, it's full of tiny pebbles. They've all been rounded, they've all been smoothed, and yet there's not a single piece of evidence of life inside of it whatsoever. If you want to look up, in Scotland it's known as the Tronodonian sandstone. You can see it at the base of the Grand Canyon and stuff, right? Okay, so you can trace this deposit, which has clearly been laid down in water, across the world, and you think, okay, well, if a world has been covered with water, and it has no life in it that has formed this kind of deposit, you're most likely dealing with a day 3 creation type event. Whether you've got the land rising up or the sea sinking down, you've got evidence of watery movements in a sense. Now, the big question that you can then go on from there is, okay, if this is dealing with a sedimentation, a form of a sedimentation on day 3, what are the rocks that are then underneath it? And you find there are very little sedimentary rocks, if any sedimentary rocks, mostly igneous, mostly this, volcanic type stuff. So regardless of how you think around the sort of events from the first covering of water, as God created the world covering water, up to the flood, you can get a nice clear picture of we're clearly dealing with the base rocks here. We're clearly dealing with the base rocks that were, in a sense, created, if you like, as opposed to ones that were formed during Noah's flood. Now, the big thing about part of Noah's flood being buried within the mantle, the biggest problem with it is once you go down below the crust, everything just melts anyway. So you'd never find any evidence of anything below that. But the fact fact that we can go down through the fossil record, get to an area where there are no fossils, there's a layer of some sedimentary rock, and then it all goes into igneous, you can find your boundary, if you like, quite easily. Any comments?
Yeah, the last time I checked, the deepest hole we've dug is about 15 plus kilometres.
Yeah,
Now,
it's
we
the
didn't
Russia
find
I
any
think.
souls screaming out from hell at that depth, which is common out there on the internet. But if you ask a question as to what's below that, we don't know, right? As Joe said rightly, we have earthquake reflections, we have seismic tests, we have all sorts of tests which can be interpreted. But the more time you spend in science, the more ways you find to interpret these things. So we really don't know. It's like asking, and again, I'm not meaning to be critical, but Douglas, the question is phrased with a couple of unknowns built into it. It's almost like, did life on Mars become extinct due to a flood like Noah's, right? They've just discovered a piece of rock in one of the craters in Mars where the Explorer satellite thing has been wandering around for the last X years. It's got calcium sulfate in it. Calcium sulfate means an evaporite. Evaporite means water. Water means flood, and away you go. But you've got each of these steps involves several more assumptions, and so the question is poorly phrased. So thank you for giving us an opportunity to discuss it, but we need questions that are built on data, and we have no data of what's buried in the mantle at all. We just have holes that haven't even scratched the top of it. Any comments, Glenn?
Just that if the question was, is part of the surface before the flood now part of the mantle, I would say yes. But like I said, you wouldn't be able to know that because it's part of the mantle.
Yeah.
It'll just be destroyed completely. Okay, let's carry on with some more questions then. Quick thank you from Douglas Boffey. So thank you very much for your donation. I'm afraid you're going to have to wait for Sam to come back if you want everything acted out. But we've got another question here from Elijah, which says in Luke 14:26, it says that if I don't hate my life, my wife and my parents, then I can't be a follower of Jesus. Please explain, I'm confused. And this is a statement from Jesus, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think you'll
go ahead, Greg.
You'll find in that passage that it's about the cost of following him, and that he goes on to say, basically, you've got to be willing to give up everything to follow me. So it's not saying that you've got to hate somebody as such. You've just got to be willing to give up everything to follow me. If your wife is someone that's going to hold you back from following Jesus, well, then you've got to, reject that, influence on your relationship with Christ. So, yeah, I think that's what he's really getting at.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if you look at the original Greek, it's Strong's number 3404, mizio, which means to hate, or it can mean to love less or esteem less. So esteem less than your love for the Lord. That's what it's saying. He's saying compared to your love for me, nothing should compare. I should be number one in your life. I love my wife. I love my kids, but they know I love the Lord more, and I expect them to love the Lord more than they love me.
And that was the problem for the rich young ruler, wasn't it? Yeah. He did everything right, it seemed, except he wouldn't part with his money and went away sad.
Yeah. To give you a personal experience from my situation with my lovely wife, is before we were married, I felt very ooey-gooey, emotional, lovey-dovey, and I said to her one night, "Darling, I love you with all my heart." And she eyes sparkled and all those sort of things, right? And then I went home and I read that passage and I thought, oh, no, I'm not allowed to love her with all my heart. Jesus takes that first priority. Yeah. So the next night I went to her and I said, "Darling, that conversation we had last night? Yes. Would you mind if I took a bit of that love back, because I've got to give it all to Jesus, not to you?" And she graciously not only smiled and giggled a bit, but she said, yes, you go right ahead. So I knew she was going to be a good wife eventually. So that was great. So praise the Lord that this is a choice you must make, whether it comes to careers, whether it comes, Jesus is first in everything. Sometimes it will occasionally lead to, like some of the people who've been persecuted, the husband or the wife will give in and bow the knee to the authority, and the other partner has to make clear that my choice is Jesus first, even if it costs me you. Right now, that's what the point is. Do you love Jesus first with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might? And that's the first and the greatest commandment. After that, you love your neighbor as yourself. So keep that in mind. That's the perspective.
And you'll find as well with a lot of these things, the statements of Jesus, they're obviously very true, but they're being posed by Jesus in order to challenge a certain person or a certain mindset. So case in point, the rich young ruler, right, who came up to him, the first thing he said was, good master. And Jesus said, why do you call me good? There's nobody good but God. Now Jesus was God, and therefore Jesus was good, and he was the only one who had a claim to that goodness because he was God. So he wasn't trying to challenge the rich young ruler on whether he was God or not. He was trying to challenge the way that the rich young ruler was viewing life. Oh, he's good, they're good, we're all good. And then the next thing he said to the instruction he gave was to go and sell all of your stuff and give it to the poor and come and follow me, right? Well, okay, does that mean, and I know Christians who've taken this literally, that we should be poor and destitute and sell our house and live off nothing and give it all? Well, if you take things literally like that, that's between you and God, but understand the point that Christ is making behind this. Are you prepared to do that for me? Are you prepared to, if I call you to live like that? Are you prepared to give up everything in the world, even your wife, even your children, for me? I mean, think about what Abraham had to do. He had to almost go through, and would have gone through, that was the point of God's testing him, to actually sacrificing his own son, right? In order to prove that he'd put God first and foremost. And there's a beautiful parallel between that and God the Father, who gave up God the Son in order to come, who did go through with that sacrifice, right? So if God the Father is willing to let God the Son go to the cross, and God the Son is willing to submit to the will of God the Father and go to the point of death to take on the sins of the world, are we willing to submit to God in that same way?
I'll give you one very, it's not severe, but it's a really true practical example. A friend of mine who ended up on the mission field actually got converted middle life and went and told his wife that he loved Jesus now. And anyway, she didn't respond well to this at all. And the marriage relationship started to go downhill to the point where she said, you've got to choose. You either choose Jesus or choose me. And she expected him to cave in because he'd been a good husband. She'd been a fairly loving wife. And he said, in that case, I will choose Jesus. Right. And she had made that option clear, and she burst into tears and got saved.
Yeah. Awesome.
Jesus was worth loving more than her, and she knew nothing about such love.
Yeah, very good. Just quickly off the back of that then, because I don't know how deep we want to go here, because is the word for loving God different than the word for loving your wife in the Greek and Hebrew? And certainly I know in the Greek you've got your different loves, your 5 different loves, agape to I forget
Leo.
and all the others. So just maybe, I mean, there's a benefit to looking in. There's obviously a huge benefit to looking into the Greek and Hebrew in understanding some of this stuff in the context of it. But and any comments in just how deep you go in studying some of these differences?
Well, since I just gave you a practical example of a marriage and love, etc., it is true. In the New Testament, we are told to love God with all our heart and all our soul and all our might. And the word particularly for the male to love his wife is agape, the same as it is for God's love to us. And the classic definition of agape, or agape, depending on what Greek school or Aussie school you went to, is to love without reservation, but it's a love that can't be repaid. It's a love you can't buy. It's a love that's freely given, and it's a love without end. Now, that's the choice a man makes towards Jesus or towards his wife. But it's fascinating to note that when it says in the letters in Timothy, let the elder women train up the younger women to love their husbands. The word for love there is filio, right? As in the love of a friend or a servant. And it's really important that you understand this difference, that the woman is, first of all, to give love to her husband as her head, right? And above his head is the headship of Jesus Christ. And the only way a marriage will really work is if the man accepts a lord over him, then he is given lordship over the woman who accepts willingly the lordship of the man. And it works really well. My lovely wife's a brilliant example of that. If you try it any other way, where she wants to be boss, which is part of the curse, she will try to, usurp things over you. But in reality, when you look, God is Lord over the man is Lord over the woman, the husband and wife are Lord over the children are Lord over the dog, and there's a descending order of hierarchy, and the Greek does help in that. If you just read the English, love, 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 you hear the Beatles sort of love, all we need is love, and that's not what it's all about. So that's what I found very helpful. For those of you who may remember cassettes and tapes, we did a whole 12 or 13 part series on the creation of love and marriage. And I think you can still download that as an MP3 file off the website. So go search MP3s, creation of love and marriage. And it's hours and hours and hours of seminars we've done on subjects like this.
And that is still available on the main Australian website. So go and find it there to download. It's well worth listening to. There's also the sort of the abridged short version, which is as a video file. But something that I discussed with John years back, and I would still love to do, bear in mind this was pre-COVID, so I haven't seen John in person since before COVID, and since COVID I've also got married, and so one of the things that I've discussed with John and would love to do at some point is basically film a Bible study between John and I. One of the things that I loved traveling around Australia with John was being able to do Bible studies together every morning. And I think it would work really well to take an audio version of that study, the creation of love and marriage, and put it into a sort of a video filmed program series. So if you're willing to donate a plane ticket, we'll see if I can get to Australia and do that next year. But that'd be great. But yes, Creation of Love and Marriage, well worth listening to, very valuable, available to download online, or you can watch the program that's available from all of our web shops, or to stream as well on our new streaming site as well. So do go and check that out. All right, we've got just a couple more questions. As well, and another couple that have come through, which is great. I'm just double checking to see if there's any more that have come in. Maybe just a quick comment on this. This is one area which we don't dig into that often, and we are trying to see if we can get some guests who could perhaps take us a little bit deeper on this type of a topic. But the James Webb Telescope, the sort of astronomy cosmological side of things, is the James Webb Telescope data more consistent with a 13.8 billion year universe or a 6,000 year one? What sort of stuff has been coming out from the James Webb Telescope recently?
Well, if you look at some, go ahead, Glenn.
I was just going to say, this isn't my area of expertise by any means, but as part of Creation Research Society, a member of that, there are those that are experts in this, and this was a very hot topic for a good while. It clearly throws some wrenches into the theories that were developed for the Big Bang, and it shows that the fallacies of it. But it is changing the models of creation researchers as well. And so it's good that they're learning new ways. I mean, we have creation research models as to how it took place. I still stick to the one that's in the Bible of God spoke and it happened. But we like as humans to try to figure out how and why. So it's been good. They're learning some new things and adjusting some of the models. It clearly, though, does not support the 13 billion year model.
Yeah.
That would be my take of what I gained from listening to their discussions, and sometimes heated arguments, because we in creation science, we do not always agree on everything. And Joe, this brings up a question that someone else asked about the president of Institute of Creation Research. We're not going to talk about another organization. I think that's what we agreed to, one of our sisters organizations. We may not agree with all them, but they are outstanding people. We don't all agree within ourselves, I think, on every single subject. That's part of science. We're studying, we're learning all the time, and we're refining each other, just as the Bible tells us to do. So the James Webb has been good for that.
Well, it seems to have coincided with a move away from the Big Bang as a general explanation for the beginning of the universe. In the New Scientist last year, in November last year, they reported that most cosmologists are moving away from the Big Bang and they're going to inflationary cosmology, which will fail them as well, because it's not based on the truth, which is a creator God. So they can have whatever their models they want to, but then they're not going to come up with the truth through them if they're not relying on the scripture. Mm-hmm. So it's got to be whatever real evidence the James Webb Telescope is coming up with has to be closer to the 6,000-year-old universe. Simple as that. Mm-hmm.
Because that is the truth.
Yeah, because it's the truth. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good stuff. All right, we've got another question here. God turned Lot's wife into a pillar of salt. Surely that's breaking the commandment of not to commit a murder. I'll make a comment and then turn it over to the others. Just the first thing is to understand what murder is, the unjust killing. God actually gives permission to kill people in the Old Testament under his provision and under his instruction. So you find that way back at the time of Noah. If somebody has unjustly killed somebody, if somebody has murdered somebody and there are the witnesses, then that person who committed the murder shall also be put to death. That's not a second murder that has been committed. That is justice that has been taking place under the law of God. Now, when it comes to God killing people or turning people into salt, you have to bear in mind that every single person alive today, ever since Adam has fallen, are living with the, I suppose you could say, death penalty. It really is that, right? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. So all of us deserve to be struck down dead by God at any one point, right? That is the default condition of mankind according to the Bible. And so God has every single right to strike anybody down at any point, including turning people to salt. That's what the beauty of Christ's sacrifice was, is that he has redeemed us. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Right? So you're not dealing with an issue of murder here. Lot's wife was a sinner, just like Lot, and both of them deserved to die, but God had given one additional strict instruction, which was do not look back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's wife did, and as a result, she was turned to the pillar of salt. It wasn't murder, it was justice, and it was righteous justice as well. And then you can take that one step further to the fact that every single one of us deserve this righteous justice. It's only by God's mercy that we're still alive today, and it's only by God's grace that we can get redemption from that sin. Any other comments?
Well, as I understand it, it's been a long time since I've looked into it, but as I understand it, when you look into the original story, it's not that she just stopped. She actually turned back and went back towards Sodom. In other words, she was going back into an area God said he was going to judge anyway. Lot had been deliberately pulled out of the judgment, but she turned and went back into the judgment, if you like. So she was taking it upon her own head in a sense.
I think you've said it well, guys. That's probably nothing else to say. But, of course, it does help if you understand God's right to do this to every sinner, and then you actually have to work through who goes to war, who takes up arms. All of these things are related to the fact that God is the one who has the right to judge. He's given us his judgment. And when he tells us you will take the life of someone who's a murderer, then you are playing with fire if your government goes back to they must go to jail for life. And now we have a world where many people are demanding that these murderers be put in jail, the worst sort, for all their days and never be let out, at horrendous expense to the people who've been sinned against, and yet never punishing the person in the way God said. You may remember that Mr. William Penn, who established the penitentiaries, did so that the people could become Christians through the counselling of the pastors. Even those who were on the death row had the opportunity of receiving Christ as Saviour, because our way of killing people is temporary. There's a second death which is faced in the Bible, and that's the death of being cast into the final lake of fire, which is a living hell in a real sense.
Yeah. Little old me brings up an interesting comment on the back of this. What about abortionists?
Are you asking us to judge
Well,
them?
any comment? What about abortionists? Should abortionists biblically? This is going to get very, very deep and controversial. should abortionists face a death penalty for murdering people, i.e., children, biblically?
I think they will. They will face. They will stand before the Almighty Judge, and they will pay the penalty. Now the question is on earth, because then you can get into, well, God told me to go and do this. I would have a real, issue with you taking the law into your own hands.
We'll put it this way: a baby that they abort now, including in Australia, can be saved at the age they're aborted, and can live as it's up to birth. Abortion up to birth means that one day they're aborted and it's not murder, and the next day, if they're killed after they've been born, they're a murderer. So I think it's one and the same.
Yeah, I agree with you, Craig. If you study history, you may remember the Spartan society back in ancient Greece, who would take their young-born children and leave them out in the cold and the wind and the rain, and only if they lived were they allowed to become part of that society. Hence, you had a very, very tough-minded society, a very kill or be killed society, and your certificate was that you survived the threat of your death. Now, they thought that was just purely cultural, but in reality, when Greece and the other places became Christian or Christianized, all of those procedures were banned, right? Because they represent murder. And even if your abortionist can't be legally put to death, he's already been put to death by God hundreds of times over, and he will pay the price, or she will pay the price, of being a murderer. There is no easy definition. The only exception to that is when you get a mother whose life is in danger, and only by removing the child can you save the mother. That's a sad situation, a reality in medical history, but it's the exception rather than the rule.
Mm-hmm. But we as Christians, how do we go? How do we deal with these that are conducting abortions? I think first and foremost, we're praying for them, and God has changed many. One of the great movies that came out a few years ago here was a lady that was working in the industry, and then she became a Christian when she realized these were really lives that she was taking, and has fought against it. But the other is, get involved in changing the laws in your country. But taking the law into your own hands to go and then kill the person conducting it, that's not what God's called us to do.
No.
Well, I remember Paul's testimony in Scripture when he became a Christian. he regards himself as the worst of the converts because he'd been murdering Christians.
Yes.
And that's what he was doing, right? Justified by the state, which abortion is at the moment, but that didn't matter in God's sight. And he was just rejoicing in what God had saved him from. He'd saved him from unbelievable agony in eternity and called him into Christ's kingdom. And now his testimony was, I used to be a murderer. I used to be a killer.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember one man who came up to me at a meeting and said, one of your board members led me to Christ. I said, really? Where? In prison. I said, what were you doing in prison? Oh, I was in there on murder charges.
Yeah.
And here he is out of prison now, because what's the point in keeping a converted man in when he's totally changed, and now he's witnessing for Christ.
Awesome.
Yeah. Great stuff. Well, I think we're just about coming to the end of our questions. In fact, I think we may be at the end of our questions. We've only got a couple of minutes left of the program anyway. So has anybody got any final comments or points that they'd like to put across over what we've discussed tonight, or things to close with before we finish down, just while I check and see if there's any last questions?
Don't forget, August the 31st, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and Sunday the 1st of September, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock at 9 Success Street at the Creation Discovery Centre. Come and see our new displays on Aboriginal real history. They haven't been here for 65,000 years. The Europeans are here for the same reason that the Aborigines are. Acts chapter 17, verse 26, God has appointed to everyone a place. And as you read through the rest of that verse, it talks all about that they may come to know Christ. So our new display is called From Adam to Australia for Jesus' sake. Great new displays involving all sorts of artifacts from Africa and places like that, from the Pacific. So that's the last day of August. You'll need to phone or text us that you're coming, and it's free. Sorry, Joe, you couldn't avoid that.
No, that's good.
Well, we must be able to do an advertisement as well then, can we?
Okay.
Go for it. All the
As long as it's not a paid one. But Dr. Diane Eager and myself are speaking tonight at the Woden Valley Alliance Church here in Canberra, starting at 6 o'clock. So it's I think it's Namatjira Drive, Woden, Warramanga, in the Woden Valley area of Canberra. Come along 6 p.m. and Diane's speaking on the science supporting the dispersal from Babel, and the fact that we're all one people, one blood, and I'll be speaking around that subject as well. So come along.
Great stuff.
And I'll end with I'm going to be gone for the next 3 weeks. Y'all pray for me and my wife as we travel with another friend. Pray we find a lot of fossils. But last time I found a little fish with plants in it as well. And we're hoping to find more things like that, because how do you explain the fish and the plants? And so anyway, just pray that we find some really great evidences for the truth of God's word on this trip.
Absolutely.
Wasn't there talk that they were going to close that fossil collecting site?
There's so many quarries around there. I think, though, at some point there's some talk that they're starting to run out.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing the results anyway.
Absolutely. All right, folks, it's about time we wrap things up and close things down now. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you all very much for asking all of your questions. It's been a good run tonight, which has been great, and it does help us as well in getting more content up, or daily content up on YouTube. So that's really great. When we started this stream, we were only 5 subscribers, I think, away from hitting 6,000. So if you haven't subscribed and you are watching, then go and subscribe. And if you know people who aren't subscribed, tell them to just subscribe, so that we can reach some targets, and onwards and upwards from there as we have a new program that we're going to be bringing to you in the next few weeks. Thanks all very much, everybody. That's fantastic. We will see you next time for another topic. Goodbye all, and God bless. We will catch you later.
See you in a
Bye.
month.